Good evening. Happy to see so many of you here. Begin the verse of the Kesa. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Gotcha of atonement. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. Fragrance of this incense invites the awakened mind to be present with us now. The fragrance of this incense fills our room, protects and guards our minds from wrong thinking. The fragrance of this incense unites us with precepts, concentration, and insight. We offer it for all beings. Homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I go to the Buddha for guidance. I shall become one with the Buddha. I resolve that I shall each day follow the way of life he laid down for us to walk, and awakened unto his supreme wisdom. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I shall become one with the Dharma. The gates of Dharma are manifold. I vow to enter them all. The goal of wisdom is ever beyond. I shall attain it. I go to the Sangha for guidance. I shall become one with the Sangha. In the spirit of universal fellowship and as a member of the Sangha, I pledge myself to strive for the enlightenment of all beings. The Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upward to the skies and downward to the depths, outward and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, sitting or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into the world of suffering. May I be happy and well, may no harm come to me, may I learn compassion, may all my friends, family, and those I love be happy and well, may no harm come to them, may they learn compassion, may all those troubled in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well, may no harm come to them, may they learn compassion. May all those who have hurt me in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those I have hurt in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all my enemies be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all living beings be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. Before we meditate, I'm going to read you something. So I had conversations with a couple of people recently along the lines of how do we find happiness in such difficult times and that sort of thing. And so I'm going to talk about happiness tonight. And before we meditate, I want to read you this excerpt from an essay by the Dalai Lama. And he says, I believe the purpose of life is to be happy. From the moment of birth, every human being wants happiness and does not want suffering. Neither social conditioning nor education nor ideology affect this. From the very core of our being, we simply desire contentment. I don't know whether the universe with its countless galaxies, stars, and planets has a deeper meaning or not, but at the very least, it is clear that we humans who live on this earth face the task of making a happy life for ourselves. Therefore, it is important to discover what will bring about the greatest degree of happiness. For a start, it is possible to divide every kind of happiness and suffering into two main categories, mental and physical. Of the two, it is the mind that exerts the greatest influence on most of us. Hence, we should devote our most serious efforts to bringing about mental peace. From my own limited experience, I have found that the greatest degree of inner tranquility comes from the development of love and compassion. The more we care for the happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being becomes. It is the ultimate source of success in life. Individual happiness can contribute in a profound and effective way to the overall improvement of our entire human community. I believe that at every level of society, the key to a happier and more successful world is the growth of compassion. We do not need to become religious, nor do we need to believe in an ideology. All that is necessary is for each of us to develop our good human qualities. So, I invite you to get into a meditation posture, whatever is useful for you. I'm going to move a little bit closer to make sure you can hear me. Close your eyes or otherwise look into your heart. Take a few nice deep breaths. And as you exhale, just let this thought ride silently on your breath. May I be happy. And by this we mean right now, sitting here, breathing one breath at a time. May I be happy. May I be free from animosity. And if there's any ill will of any kind present in your heart, let it go. And as we do the meditation, if any arises, any angry thoughts, anything like that, just let them pass. You can always be angry later if you want. But for now, give yourself freedom from that. May I be free from stress and affliction. So whatever comes into our awareness, good things that we want to cling to, unpleasant things that we don't like and want to get rid of, just let them pass or let them be. There's no need to hold on to anything, no need to push anything away. If we let go, let be, then we don't engage with things in a way that creates stress. And if we don't nurture stress, we don't create affliction. May I look after myself with ease. And just watching the mind, its tendency to attach, to have aversion, and just bringing it back calmly and compassionately with compassion for ourselves back to our object of meditation. And call to mind a loved one. Visualize them being there with you, or think of their name and send them the wish. May they be happy. And if you'd like to visualize, you can visualize that as a light radiating from your heart to touch them. Or you might feel it as a warmth at your heart already. Imagine that reaching out, touching them with the warmth of your goodwill. May they be happy. And think of a friend, someone that makes you feel good when you think about them. Maybe you just like being with them. Maybe they've done some kindnesses for you. And don't engage in any problem solving while you do this. It's really to develop your ability to reach out to others with kindness. So think of your friend and well, may they be happy. And think of kind of a neutral person, an acquaintance or somebody that you don't really have much of a feeling for one way or the other. And you might not know very much about them, but you know that, like yourself and your friend and your loved one, as the Dalai Lama says, they want to be happy. They'll have a better life if they're happy. And so extend that wish for their happiness. May they be happy. And maybe you're in conflict with someone. And call them to mind and wish them well also. So if this is new to you, don't pick the worst person in the world, someone who's done something mildly irritating. Will suffice for now. And recognize that difficult people are difficult because they're stressed, because they're not happy. They're just not dealing with that very skillfully. But if they learned how to experience real happiness, how to transcend stress, they'd be better people. So wish them happiness. May they be happy. And finally, all beings. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from animosity. May all beings be free from stress and affliction. May all beings look after themselves with ease. So let's take a couple moments just to bring your attention back to your breath, back to your heart. Stop sending it out. But you know you have this wellspring of goodwill available to you anytime. This warmth is always there. The more you use it, the more you have. The bell will ring twice to end the meditation. Hope that went well for everyone. And one thing that bugs me the most about doing these things remote in this way, besides lighting issues, That didn't help. Any worse. Is that I can't say, so how was that? I mean, I can ask, but then it takes 10 minutes for me to get your answer. So it's not very conversational, but that's all right. Um, so as I said, there's so many people suffering so much right now. I mean, mostly from the pandemic, but other things as well. And I'm very grateful that my circumstances are what they are, because I mean, I've taken little hits and stuff, and certainly things are less comfortable for me than they were back in February. But I've got pretty good, really. But I do really feel for people, and very concerned for people like my son, who's unemployed, has been unemployed for months. And a friend of mine found out yesterday that the organization that she'd worked for years, has letting her go, or they've cut her hours, put her on part-time, very minimal hours and stuff, and just really kind of not treating people well. And it's just a challenge. And I'll tell you, if you're feeling it, you are not alone. A lot of people are. And I had a decent meditation this morning for the first time in months. I mean, not the only decent meditation, but it was one of the quieter meditations I've had since March. And it's just, you can expect to deal with some difficulties, difficult feelings and things like that. And so anyway, I'm going to talk about happiness. I'm not going to talk about how stressful things are, but the reason I'm talking about happiness is because we're in this time where there's a lot of stress, and people are looking for a way to contend with that. So, the meditation we just did is a good one for this, for most people. And so I would encourage you to work with that. It's interesting. I teach a contemplative practices class at Stetson. It's a short half-hour class twice a week with the Wellness Center. And we did that meditation. And one of my colleagues, somebody I've known for quite a while, came to the class, and so I guided her through that. She'd never done it before, never done Metta Bhavana before, never heard of it. But she meditates, and she's worked with some of the meditation apps that are out there and stuff. And so she'd done some of the guided meditations. And she said, this was really different. She said, usually they're very much oriented toward the self, and I knew exactly what she meant. A lot of the apps are, self-affirmations and that kind of thing. And she goes, this was just a really different experience, and in really good ways, because to direct your attention outward to helping others, she ended up feeling way better than she would normally have felt from one of these, meditation app things. And I don't know which app she was using, or whose guided meditations they were, or anything like that. But you see these things a lot where they have you meditate on, I am this kind of person. I am free from that kind of stuff. And it really kind of reflects a misunderstanding of how the mind works and what really leads to happiness, which is what we're going to talk about. So years ago, this was when Volusia Buddhist Fellowship was meeting before the Unitarian Church moved into its present quarters. It was in what had been an A-frame house. It had been converted into a church, and so this was a long time ago. Some of you will remember it. And a fellow, one of our longtime members, brought a colleague to one of the meetings, and the person that he brought was a lifelong Buddhist who'd grown up he'd grown up in China, I think. So he'd grown up in a Buddhist culture. And so that evening, I led that Metta Bhavana meditation. And afterward, I asked, so how did that go? And he said he had had some difficulty with it. So I asked him to explain what kind of difficulty he had. And he said, well, in my culture, we don't talk about happiness because we think it's selfish to want to be happy. We value harmony instead. And this was years ago, but it stuck with me, and I've thought about that a lot afterward, and have thought about it ever since. So most of you know that there's two main divisions in Buddhism: Theravada, or what's called Theravada these days, and Mahayana. So Southern Buddhism and Northern Buddhism. And Mahayana really got started after Buddhism spread from India into China, and the objective of seeking individual freedom, which is what Buddhism was about in India, had been replaced by what we call the Bodhisattva ideal, where one seeks enlightenment, but for the benefit of others. And so we don't try to escape altogether the cycle of birth and rebirth, because we want to continue to help others seek enlightenment. So from a philosophical and historical perspective, I kind of understood where he was coming from, but it had never occurred to me that on this sort of down-to-earth personal level, that you wouldn't concern yourself with the pursuit of happiness. It's so much talked about in our culture. And I was fascinated by this idea. I mean, our government was founded on the idea that, God himself had granted us an inalienable right to pursue happiness, right? And so the most fascinating thing is that despite deprioritizing happiness, this guy seemed actually quite happy, when I talked to him. And so it made me wonder, what's the relationship between valuing happiness and actually being happy? So for much of my life, I would not have described myself as happy. And I'm not going into details, but between some family issues and environmental issues and genetic hardwiring and things like that, happiness was never easy for me to come by. But these days, I'd say I'm generally happy, and maybe even a lot happy. So my mind has been kind of a laboratory for me, and I've reviewed a lot of the things that I've done in an attempt to figure out what it means that I can tell you that I'm happy. And in this process of reviewing this, I ran into a little bit of a conundrum. I started looking through some books that I have on the subject of happiness, and I have several by the Dalai Lama, including The Art of Happiness, where he talks about why happiness is important and how to be happy. And there's a book that I read a long time ago and that I still have on my bookshelf. It's by Bertrand Russell. It's called The Conquest of Happiness. And he goes into a lot of detail about various forms of unhappiness. And then some of you know that Albert Ellis is sort of a hero of mine. Several of his books discovered the importance of seeking happiness and that sort of thing. But none of these books define really what is meant by the word happiness. And so if you're trying to figure out how to get something, you kind of want to know how to recognize it when you've got it, right? And so it occurred to me that it would be useful to define for ourselves what it is that we mean when we say happy, and then see if that definition can help us find our way to that. So I looked up in the dictionary, and my dictionary says happiness is the state of being happy, and that's not particularly helpful. But then it goes on to give a lot of synonyms like pleasure, contentment, satisfaction, cheerfulness, merriment, joviality, and a bunch of stuff like that. And these are all positive, what we consider pleasant or positive emotions and characteristics, but I don't think they equate to what we really are looking for when we talk about happiness. They're short term, they're passing pleasurable emotions. In some cases, they describe states that are maybe part of happiness, but aren't quite the full experience. The Dalai Lama says something in that thing about how we seek contentment. Yeah, contentment's okay, but it's a little boring, right? So, or we think of contentment as being this kind of static space. Um, but I think when somebody says, I want to be happy, they're talking about sort of a global, sustained condition. So not just pleasure. Pleasure comes and goes, right? All of these things, joviality and stuff like that. I mean, merriment, those things tend to be very circumstantial. So what we want is something that's a little bit longer term. So in Buddhism, we talk about that, and we talk about true happiness, that is defined as a state of total liberation often. Most of us are not going to experience that, at least not in one lifetime. And the Buddha said that there were intermediate states of happiness that we could also seek and that householders should seek and enjoy. So I think we could define happiness in terms of something that's generally pleasurable in a way that is sustainable, renewable, even self-promoting. In other words, it should be resilient and it should lead to more happiness, even when we're in difficult circumstances. And so it should generally feel good emotionally and physically, but it should also be good for us and not just as individuals, but it should be healthy for the circumstances in which we live. So support our family life and our social life and even our community, because that's the context in which we're going to thrive or not thrive, right? So happiness should be a part of our, not just staying alive, but of thriving. And so it should it should contribute to the circumstances that support our thriving, right? So there is a field of research, positive psychology, which explores the nature of happiness and how we become happy. The idea with positive psychology is, instead of studying mental illness and what makes people sick, we study people who are happy and, successful, or however you want to look at that, and figure out what it is that they do that creates that. And so they study the strengths and virtues. This is a quote from one of the journals of positive psychology, that enable individuals and communities to thrive. So if you want to be healthy and happy, what do you do in order to get it? And so these scientists argue that to focus on mental disorders doesn't really give us a complete understanding of mental health. They study the things that cause happiness in order to teach us how to be mentally well. And so they tend to define happiness as a kind of subjective well-being, where one feels a sense of life satisfaction and that you have a kind of preponderance of positive emotions. So of the emotions you experience, you get more pleasant ones than unpleasant ones. And research shows that the typical person thinks that happiness is a result of circumstances. But then the researchers find that circumstance is actually a fairly small part of what makes us happy or unhappy. So this confirms what the Buddha taught, that suffering is created by the way the mind engages with reality. It's not created so much by the reality itself. Some suffering is inevitable, but how much suffering you experience is a result of what you do with the circumstances that you're in. And so one researcher concluded that our circumstances only account for about 10% of our sense of well-being. And the rest of it either results from kind of preconditioning or from our own actions, right? So what do you do? And generally, what we think of as happiness is made up of three things: pleasure, engagement, and meaning. So in other words, if we're happy, we live in a way that feels pretty good, and we get some enjoyment from what we do. So this conversation has come up a few times recently too, with people who've been reading about Buddhism And it sounds like you're not supposed to enjoy anything. And then you realize that you have some pretty good experiences from meditation and from letting go of things, creating a lot of stress for you, and you start to feel good, and you go, is it okay? Should I be having some joy? Should I be having blissful feelings? And the answer is yes, you should, because if you're getting the sort of spiritual benefit from doing the practice, then it's going to feel good, and that feeling good supports your practice. So when you get these positive feelings that are usually of a spiritual nature, this is when Thanissaro Bhikkhu, I think it was talks about, you get these spiritual things that happen instead of whatever other crap you were hanging on to before. And it's like trading candy for gold. The gold is the spiritual experience, and it's way more valuable and more sustained. So a lot of people associate happiness with pleasure. I'd be really happy if I had a Ferrari, or I'd be really happy if I had a better job, or if I had a yacht, or whatever, right? But that actually accounts for a fairly small part of happiness. Happy people experience ongoing positive emotions, but those tend to derive less from what we think of as pleasure and more from being engaged in meaningful activity. And so that engagement, coupled with a sense that life is worthwhile, is what actually is responsible for most happiness. So when you practice Buddhism, you will have some of the pleasant experiences that happen as you let go of a lot of the things that look good but really aren't good. If you are able to experience your circumstances despite their difficulties as being kind of neutral, and you can find the place within where happiness is, and you have set for yourself a kind of meaningful mission in life, for lack of a better term. So, I know what gives my life meaning. I do what I do because I want to help people with their suffering, and ultimately I have this goal that transcends this life, to help all beings with their suffering. And so I'm not going to tell you need to do that, but find what gives your life meaning outside of whatever circumstances you're in at the moment. Yes, you need to survive, and you got to pay your bills and all of that kind of stuff, support your family and all of those things. But you also need to know what is really important to me and what's going to continue to be important to me a year from now or a couple of years from now that gives my life long-term meaning. And so, this is something. This is not just a state you're in, it's actually something that you do, right? So back in the dark ages before COVID-19, BC, bad joke, I'm sorry. But I used to lead meetings in Palm Coast once a month. And I was at one of those meetings, I was talking about happiness. And I mentioned that most people think of happiness as kind of a thing. It's a condition that happens to us. But pleasure, engagement, and meaning are actually fairly active processes. And when I said that, this lady in the group had this epiphany. I mean, you could see it, like the light going on over light bulb over her head. And she smiles really big and she says, next time somebody asks me if I am happy, I'm going to say, no, I do happy. And that made me really happy because she got it. Happiness is something that you do. It's an active process. So let me break these areas down a little bit and talk about this idea of doing happiness, right? So the Dalai Lama in that essay points out that pleasure and suffering fall into mainly two categories, mental and physical. And of the two, it's the mind that exerts the greatest influence on most of us. So we should concern ourselves as much as possible with developing the mental causes for pleasure above the physical and external ones. There's nothing wrong with physical pleasures, by the way, when you enjoy them reasonably and responsibly. But if you cling to that as a source for happiness, it may well end up causing pain. There's a scripture, a sutra called The Noble One's Happiness, and the Buddha is contrasting the unstable pleasures to those that come from developing the mind. And he said, forms and sounds and flavors and smells and touches and pleasant thoughts are wished for, cherished, and pleasing, as long as it's said that these are real. But for the world and for its devas, these are equal to happiness, whereas when they come to an end, they are equal to pain. So when you are attached to something external and you're making that your source of happiness, you're making your happiness dependent on something which is not yours in any way, right? And so it's going to change probably and become a disappointment and maybe a source of pain. So pleasures fade, and in fading become painful. So rather than cultivating positive feelings that come from externals, cultivate those that come from the mind. This Ringo Starr song just popped into my head, and I'd sing it to you, but I'm afraid, there's all this issue with rights on music on YouTube, so I won't. But if you get a chance, all right, go to the search thing on YouTube and look up Wine, Women, and Loud Happy Songs. So Ringo Starr recorded it not too long after the Beatles broke up. He says, Wine, Women, and Loud Happy Songs. I had all three, but none lasted long. The women ran off. I drank all the wine, and the songs died away when I ran out of dimes. It's really, it's very much, it's like, it's the Dharma in a country song. It's really cool. Anyway, pleasures fade, and in fading become painful. So cultivate the pleasures that come from the mind. In the past, psychologists have tended to view positive emotions as sort of symptoms of happiness. You're joyful, it's because you're happy, etc. But then in the last few decades, they started to understand what the Buddha pointed out 2,500 years ago, which is that positive emotions are a cause of happiness, not a consequence of it. So emotions result from the mind's interactions with things that happen. And so you can cultivate positive emotions by training the mind to interact in skillful ways. And when you do that, you're happier. So, for example, cultivate gratitude. How do you do that? You do that by paying attention to the good that comes your way. Even in tough times, there are things to be grateful for. So, the simple thing is a gratitude journal. Before you go to bed at night, write down three reasons you have for feeling grateful. And people find that even over the long term, that creates a shift in our sense of personal well-being. Cultivate serenity through meditation, practicing acceptance, things like that. Cultivate love and compassion by making a habit of wanting others to be happy. So the meditation that we did, that's really, if you practice that, you're practicing the habit of wanting others to be happy. And that will make you happier. That's the irony of that, is that if you give happiness, it improves your sense of well-being. So, we try to avoid talking about positive and negative emotions. It's not really an accurate way of talking about that. We talk about skillful and unskillful. Skillful emotions tend to feel better and to cause less stress for ourselves and others. And they tend to lead to better conditions and circumstances. And unskillful ones have that opposite effect. That doesn't mean that if you're happy, you're going to walk around feeling good all the time, right? When bad things happen, you should not feel good. That would be crazy. My cat died last week. I was sad as hell. I loved that cat. She was a great cat, I don't want to be okay with that. I had 19 years with this wonderful cat, and I'm getting sad now thinking about that. That's authentic. That's a genuine emotion. If you walk around going, well, I'm just equanimous about everything, that would be, to use a Dharma term, bullshit, right? We want to experience life But we don't want our feelings to rule us. We want to be able to experience difficulties skillfully, which sometimes will not feel great. But because we have the skill, we'll be able to overcome them. We'll have the resilience. So, uh, if we have emotional resilience, then when bad things happen, we're going to suffer less. When we feel good emotionally, we tend to be more creative and find more meaning in life and so on. So we want to get back to feeling pretty good quickly. But this doesn't mean that you have to go around feeling a certain way. Feelings are natural. Unpleasant feelings arise naturally as a response to unpleasant circumstances. So accept that, but then do what you need to do. Again, engage, right, in your life, engage with others. And so this is kind of the next step. To engage, we can look at that as kind of two things. One is to be very present with what you're doing. But the other part is to be engaged with other people. So part of happiness comes about from doing things that allow us to lose ourselves in the process of doing these jobs or other activities. There was a psychologist who was another big influence on me. His name was Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And he studied happiness, and he came up with this thing called flow, that he called flow. Musicians experience this when they're caught up in playing music and improvising. Everything's really coming together well. I experience it when I'm doing Tai Chi. There's countless ways of getting into flow, including meditation, when you sit still long enough. Thank you, Marilyn. Yeah, it was a lucky cat. I was a lucky guy to have such a good cat, too. I'll tell you about this cat one of these days. It was a very good cat. Anyway, if you sit still long enough, watching your breath or cultivating goodwill, you'll get into the flow of that experience. It won't last forever, but while you're in it, you'll experience that sense of losing yourself in the flow of what's going on. And that contributes over the short term and the long term to your overall sense of well-being. But the other thing is to be connected to others. Now, this is hard to do right now if you're one of the people who are, closed in a whole lot and you don't have a lot of social activities. But people with good social networks and ties to family and things like that tend to be happier. And so that's something worth cultivating, even if a lot of your life is remote. I mean, there are spiritual communities out there. You could be sitting with a Zen community every day if you wanted to, online. It's one of the upsides to this is that there's a lot of online activity like that. I don't know if it has the same quality. I think we need to get outside. When a couple of weeks after the Y shut down, my Tai Chi students were just going nuts and asking, could we please start practicing? And so we started going to the park and spreading out, 6 to 10 feet apart and no more than 10 people showing up at once and practicing together and being outside and being with other people really enhanced my sense of well-being. And they tell me that theirs did too. When it got really hot in July, we knocked off for about 3 weeks and I started feeling my mood darken, from not having that. So if you can, even if it's just to get out and walk around the block or something, get outside. If you can get face to face with people, face to face being 6 or more feet apart, and with masks on, do that. People with good social networks tend to be happier, and people who attend worship services tend to be happier. I don't know if there's been any studies done on virtual church services or Buddhist services or anything like that, and whether they have the same effect as face-to-face. But this is part of why there are 3 jewels in Buddhism: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Right, the teacher and the reality that awakening is available to us. the path to awakening and the spiritual community. That's one of our refuges. So social networking is a good reason to go to services, but where a community like this comes in really handy is in this area of providing meaning. Your spiritual community, along with your practices, is really a good framework for making life purposeful. And so now you have these three things coming together with this, with spiritual practice. You have meaning, you have the community, and you have a practice that leads to greater senses of joy, stress, and so you have the positive feelings also. So yeah, I mentioned the Bertrand Russell's book, Conquest of Happiness. In that book, he explains how he had gone from an unhappy person to a generally happy one. And he said, very largely, it's due to a diminishing preoccupation with myself. Gradually, I learned to be indifferent to myself and came to center my attention increasingly upon the state of the world, various branches of knowledge, the individuals for whom I felt affection. So, just like I was talking about with the Metta Bhavana, if when we're going through life feeling bad, we tend to be preoccupied with ourselves. When we start looking beyond outside ourselves, when we divert our attention away from here to everything else, we start feeling better. So, I can't give you a step-by-step method for you to feel engaged or live meaningfully, but the Dalai Lama says something in that essay that I think we can all learn from. He said, the greatest happiness comes from the development of love and compassion. And, if you're caught up in the political stuff and everything, if you can take these things and do what you can to create acts of kindness and compassion for others, rather than getting caught up in the flame wars on Facebook and all of the stuff that's going wrong and all of that. You can spend a little bit of time looking around for ways to be kind. I think that would be a useful thing to do, a good use of your time. So I hope this was helpful. It's real easy, I know, to sit here and say, be compassionate and everything will be all right. It's a challenge. It's a challenging time. But I'm always reminded, this is one of my sort of mantras, is this exchange between Soen Roshi and a student who said, Master, I'm so discouraged. What can I do? And Soen Roshi said, encourage others. I think I think that even when we're remote like this, that we do have this sense of sitting together. So when you can, I mean, if we can be here, we're all practicing together. Might be a 2 or 3 second lag, but we're still pretty close. So anyway, it's almost 8:00, so I should wrap up and let you go back to your lives. We'll do the dedication, and see if you want to talk about this some more. Come tomorrow to the Zoom meeting, right? Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, existing right here now, and offering flowers, candles, and incense, hearing the Dharma and training the mind. Great merit is attained. We dedicate this merit to the great Master Shakyamuni Buddha, the all-pervading and everlasting three treasures, to the 16 guardians and all protectors of the Dharma and their relations throughout space and time, to all ancestors of this Sangha and all beings in the Dharma world. May penetrating light dispel the darkness of ignorance, let all karma be resolved and the mind flower bloom in eternal spring. May the Dharma body maintain strength and health, and years of life be lengthened for all teachers of this Sangha. May their vows be fully realized, and may they live in perfect peace with Buddha Dharma. We pray for those suffering from violence and those who grieve for them, for those living in oppression, for all who are imprisoned who should be free, for all refugees from violence, hunger, and catastrophe, man-made or natural. We pray for the health and well-being of those suffering from diseases of body, mind, or spirit, those working toward the healing of those afflictions. We pray for those suffering from COVID-19, those working to protect and treat them, and those grieving for those lost to this pandemic. May they be serene through all their troubles, and may we realize the enlightened way together. Sabe sata sadahantu avera sukha jivino katang punya phalang mayang sabe bhagi bhavantu te. May all beings always live happily, free from animosity. May all share in the blessings that spring from the good we have done. All right, thank you, and I will see you again soon. Have a good evening.